it will then bump you up to a new version of the API. So I was just going to walk you through kind of like how to do that or how to read that documentation. So let me just show you. So this is the code for the for version 2 of the API, right? Which is kind of what the lab relies on. And as long as you use like my API keys, although I don't know, maybe we'll hit some sort of limit, it would work fine. So you can see the way that kind of my code works is the key thing is this request venues function, and that calls request.get the URL and provides this like full params, right? So these are your like query parameters here, okay? So the full params are a combination of the query parameters that you'll search with. So for right now, it's the longitude and latitude and some search term, and then your auth params, right? So here I'm just copying, and then this update, right, merges the two dictionaries in Python, and then I just return it. So full params, right, this is a combination of the auth params and the query params, and combine that with the base URL, or it's the URL, slash venue slash search. If you do this and you go to console.py, you can see I'm importing right from the perspective of the code that I'm calling. So from console, we import API, right? API.adapters.client, adapters.client, import the client class, and let's just do that again. So I can now run Python 3-i console, create a new client, right, and then call client dot request venues, and that should give me back the response, right? So let's take a look. Dot request venues. Okay, so that makes a request, and you can see here's my venues. My guess is this is some sort of list of dictionaries. So I get the first one. It looks like this is right the first like venue. So with the second, so this is what I think was working for a lot of you. Let me take a look, see if there's a question. Shouldn't we supply... Okay, so let me take this in reverse order. So Conwell asked, shouldn't we supply query parameters to request venues? We wouldn't be able to change query parameters otherwise. Yeah, but this is... Oh, that is a good point. Yeah, good catch, Conwell. So, yeah, we should do this. I don't know why... I don't know if the test asks you to do this, but ideally... I don't know why I didn't do it this way. Right, so ideally, yeah, when you make the request, maybe we'd have default arguments, and then this would probably pass through the full params here, right? Pass through my query params here. So in other words, the point is, like, if I want to change like this from tacos, right, to like Italian, right, then that will take the dictionary, right, override this dictionary, pass it through here, combine it, right, override the default here, and then combine the query params, and then ultimately, right, make the request, right, get the return value here, which is the combined auth params and the query params, and then make the request. So this should be updated to look like this. That was a very good catch. Let's just see that. So let's exit out of here. And now I do Python 3 console.py, create the new client, client.request venues, and this time we'll pass through like Italian or something, or pizza. It's fine. And then we'll take a look at venues, the first one. Yeah, it seems like it worked, right? So again, the way this worked is, right, as Conwell pointed out, we should be able to pass through parameters here when we call request venues. So to do that, I just set a default argument, and then I'm passing through the query parameters here, overrides this default argument, and then, gives me the full set of parameters. So these query parameters that we're passing through combined with the authentication parameters that have my client ID and client secret, and gets back the response. So that's a good catch. Let me see the other question. One second. Which is, the API version is based on the vparam with the date you pass through in auth params. Versioning is controlled by the v parameter, right? But yeah, there's different. Actually, like the whole API kind of works separately. Like for instance, if you go to version 3, so this is the version right here. It's kind of confusing because the documentation says you like specify a different version with the date, but this like by version here I mean like the whole format, the whole way that we interact with the API changes if we bump up to version 3, which Foursquare requires you to do if you register new API keys. So let me just so you can see that if you can see that kind of here, right? Like the version is version 3 here /places/search, and the way that, and notice also that it calls it place now if you're using version 3 as opposed to venues, right, if you use version 2. So the way I typically, this documentation is very good, meaning that you can just kind of, if you click on Python here, then you can see the corresponding Python code that you should be using, right? And notice it does look different because you see this, we're providing this headers thing here, where before we're just passing through like a set of parameters, okay? So the way you can kind of interact with this is, one, you can just put in some sample queries and notice how this changes, right? Query equals tacos now. Now that we add this, once I delete it, it's gone, but now we have this query equals tacos. And then let's do the longitude and latitude. We can do the ones that they provide as an example. So I'm just going to copy and paste that here. And now notice, right, we have this as well. For the headers, that can actually go up here, which might feel a little confusing. So you get that from registering. So I registered so you didn't have to see me do it, and got this API key. To register, you can just go to the quick start. Let me see what I did. You just log in to Foursquare Developer. I can put this in Slack. Oh no. And then I have to create a new project because I think I lost my API key. Generate additional API key. Let's get a new one. We'll name this lecture. Doesn't matter. And then here's my API key. So this I'll put into here just to get an example of how does this code work. And notice that now we have this authorization key value pair, and this is it. Like, this will work. So if you click try it, right, it will, actually try it and show you the response that you're getting. And then what we can do is we can just copy this code and paste it. And we could try it directly through the console, but ultimately what we'll do is migrate this. So let's migrate it. We'll just put this down here somewhere for now. And think about what we need. So request, we already are importing this library, we're good. The URL will need to change. So we'll upgrade the URL. Let's delete this one or comment it out. We'll do the URL. And this will be up to here. Okay, so places/search. The parameters, so now when we request, the parameters should look like this. Query, the term, comma, right? Like these should be my query parameters here. And this could be like a comma here, I think. Doesn't have to be. That looks off. I'm missing a string here, a quotation mark here. Okay, so these are my query params. So what we can do, these are actually exactly the same. So these are the query params. Instead, what I can do is just pass through the parameters here, equals params. So if you look, let's go back to our code. Right, this is the code they gave us. They're passing through the URL, but the request library takes automatically as the second argument your params. I'm not sure if I can show that. Oh, let's hold on. Nah, it's just okay. Maybe if I command clicked, it's kind of hard to see. You can just take my word for it. So this takes as a second argument the params, and this will generate your query param. Like, it will generate the corresponding URL for you. So that's the one thing, and then the next thing we can do So this will just be the query params that we pass through will be set as the params here. The only difference now is this headers thing. The headers can be our, we don't really need this anymore. The headers will be our auth token, and that will be this thing that we pasted up here. This whole large thing. And this is another string. So we can just say auth token equals this string. And now we don't need this anymore, right? Because this is my authentication right here. And now I'll just pass that through here. So that'll be self.auth token. And this is now easier, I think. I could do, actually, I'm sorry, I'm messing this up, aren't I? This is what the format should be. My apologies. So let's just change def auth, or let's call it headers. And this will, this will be that. And then this right here we'll get from the auth token. So the headers is just a dictionary, has accept application JSON, and then your auth token right here. And then we can do self.auth token and return it, right? We should probably return this. Okay, so now this is my headers. My headers should be self.headers. And we get back the venues, I'm guessing. This might not be called venues anymore. Let's see what it's called. If you make the request, you get back results. You see that? That's the key, is results. So that's fine. And then here, each then we get a list of dictionaries again. So we'll just, instead of response venues, this will just be results. And I'll go through this again. All right, let's make sure it works, and then we'll review it, and we'll go through it all over again. So we'll call a new client. Let's exit out of here. Ugh, I already broke it. Request.get URL. URL should be, let's think about this. Request.get self.url. Where's it breaking? It's breaking in line 34 of client.py. Oh, I have something right here. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, so now we create a new client, and we'll do client.requestVenues, and that'll pass through my query params, which will then do that here. It'll hit the URL. The URL is right here. Place the search now, and then it'll also pass through my headers, because we'll do self.headers, which then calls this function, right? So it returns this dictionary for me, which gives me the self.auth token, which is right here. So let's do client.requestVenues, and these should be my, I guess it's called places now. I'll call it places. And params is not defined. So I guess I'm not, let's just take a look at this. This should be called query params. So I just have a mismatch here. Let's try it one more time. Oh, that seems to have worked. And here's the same taco restaurant. It's called a little different, isn't it? Foursquare ID. The longitude and latitude. Here's the short name, the name of the restaurant, right? The address. So it has the same information. Oh, and here's the name. Los Tacos Numero Uno. Okay? So you just have to explore it a little bit. So here's my places /0, like this is my place. And then I would do the same thing that we normally do, like place.keys. Is the Foursquare ID, the categories you can see has like a list of dictionaries for each of the categories. The chain, whether there's a chain, then we can kind of keep look. Closed bucket, I don't know what that is. Likely open. Oh, whether it's closed or not. The distance, I guess from probably the search longitude and latitude I provided. The link to the restaurant, the location. Notice the location is a dictionary. Related places, that's pretty cool, although it has nothing. And the time zone. I don't know what that's for. Maybe the hours open in what time zone. I'm not sure. So how do we, just to review this again, basically we no longer need, our code got actually simpler. Because all we needed to do now is if you want to migrate to this, which you don't have to, maybe decide with your pair, is use this URL. So instead of version 2, it's version 3. Get an auth token, right? And then you just pass through the URL. So that's this. And then the query parameters, which is, whatever, same query parameters. And then also in headers, you need a dictionary. Okay? And I can send you, I sent out the documentation. So just remember, basically in the documentation, all you do is you just fill this in, tacos, longitude and latitude. I think these are the only 2 required ones. And you put in your auth token up top here. And then it will generate for you the corresponding code. And all we did was we just said, okay, well, this question mark thing is really query parameter. If you want to do it this way, you can. Like, you can just have the full URL, but I don't recommend it. I recommend, this is really, like, you can just call this with a key value, right, a dictionary, and pass this through as a params argument. Okay? So this is just passed through as a params argument here. And I'm happy to send you this as well. Like, I can just send you this in Slack. All right, how does this feel? Doable? Okay, great. All right. So you'll see if you run into this. If you don't need to change it, data practitioners use, the jobs that it's appropriate for, and then, did I link to the wrong? And then the last thing is this, like, identify your particular focus lesson. So, okay, let's start here. So this is what will be, all the tools and the various, like, data pipeline that we'll be building, and then some. This is actually just within the next, 5 weeks, maybe like 5 to 8 weeks, we'll have finished this data pipeline or something close to it. So right now, so far, what we've done is the Python component, right? Like building an API, loading in data, right, from an external API, and then using Python and SQL to load this to. This is an online transactional database, but it's just the database that we're using. From there, typically what happens is you load in data from multiple different sources. So say, we're doing like Foursquare data, but say you wanted to use that with like Yelp data, or remember like our Texas Receipts API to like combine and kind of see, well, how much money do people make based on the rating? Maybe how does that correspond to like the stock prices, whatever. So there's various different APIs you can pull in, load to a database, and then from there, what you can do, we're doing, is actually transform the data with dbt. We'll get into dbt in a few weeks, but this is basically a SQL interface. Instead of writing any Python code here, you just write SQL code, but do it in like a pretty large code base, like just a lot of SQL throughout. It could be hundreds of files. We won't go that far. Maybe we'll do like 30 or 40 files. But show you how these just SQL code bases are organized. This dbt component is used to basically transform data in your data warehouse. So like, say it's not perfectly cleaned up. Say you just like kind of did a data dump of some data, and then you want to transform it with SQL. That's what dbt is used for. And then ultimately it gets into a form where you can connect this, like maybe just kind of simplified SQL tables into that can be accessed by different dashboards. So, some of you might have explored Streamlit. You can connect Tableau to this. You can see I put them here, like Looker, Mo, Tableau. These are all different data dashboards. A big component that we have that we won't go until like end of February is Docker, AWS. These are ways to take your code and everything that's in your environment, like for instance, like the version of Python you have, the version of Postgres that you have. And with Docker, you can automatically have it download and set up that environment, and then you can deploy that to AWS. So, this data pipeline, we'll be using a Prefect initially, and we'll move on to Airflow later. But this data pipeline, like I said, we'll see this in the next, I don't know, 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. We're through this part right now, and then, you guys will see this part later on. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Then the next thing that we'll see is just moving things even more to the cloud. So we'll just expand the different services that AWS services specifically that we get. So the database we'll be using will be like AWS's database, and you can connect dbt to it. Lambda functions can be something that are triggered, say, every day or every week, and that's an AWS service. So we'll go more into like an AWS infrastructure. This is in the second semester, like well into March or so. In order to do this, in order to like actually, think about what you should be ingesting, what is even like the point of pulling all these things, right? Like oftentimes that's where data analysis comes in. So data analysis comes in on the front end, like before you begin the project, to figure out what is useful even to pull. And, once we actually automate pulling all of this data, how, making sure that this is like a worthy cause. And then also on the back end, like when you're complete, right? Because now that we're pulling all this data, consistently, we can then use data analysis to analyze it. So for that, we'll be using, we'll learn about pandas, and then we'll also just learn about like data analysis and data visualization as well. Okay, so this is, if you think about the course, the way I always describe it is backend engineering, which is what we're kind of coming to the end of in a way. We'll learn a lot more SQL, don't worry. Cloud computing, we'll get to that in the second semester, and then data pipelines. So we will be doing kind of like a bit of a whirlwind tour of data pipelines, meaning, Prefect and dbt. And this will take us, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks to get through here. Okay. And then this is that other step. So then what like jobs does this translate to? So with just like what we've learned so far, Python engineer, backend engineer, by the time you graduate from the course, you can get positions as Python engineer, backend engineer, full stack engineer, although this, typically requires some degree of HTML and JavaScript. Obviously data engineer, analytics engineer, business intelligence. We'll talk about what these things. So these are the data roles, and then these are the cloud roles, right? Because we're focusing on AWS. So this diagram probably helps like understand these different roles, or I hope it does. Right, this is what we've learned so far. There's like Flask, MVC. We'll get to SQL Alchemy, ETL, right? And that's the Python engineer. You can see the backend engineer. Typically, that does require like the Docker, AWS stuff, which we'll get to. The data pipelines component, that's involved in the full data engineering stack. This honestly is like sufficient. Like could be like considered like a core data engineering skill set right here, right? The backend engineering, cloud engineering, and then data pipelines. There's emerged, right, this role of like analytics engineer and business intelligence engineer. Essentially what that is data analytics with SQL is a way to think of it, right? So it's, using dbt. Like I said, dbt is just writing, these SQL code bases and transforming the data, not with any Python, just with SQL, until you get to like a dashboard like Tableau. All right. And then, closely related to that is the data analysis, right? If you're presenting these data insights in a dashboard, right, it needs to be meaningful information. So in order to figure out like what's meaningful, oftentimes there's a degree of, and there should be like a degree of data analysis, meaning like data exploration, seeing what, what's correlated with what, and then showing that, right, making the case that tracking this data and that this kind of chart is predictive or does, show the information that we want that's going to move the dial for some sort of business goal. I have down here like ML engineer, so you can see what that kind of tacks on is knowing these different machine learning algorithms. Then there's like this AI kind of engineer role, which I didn't really build out too much. And then finally, like there's ML ops, which is, if you use these ML models, they make predictions. Well, those predictions are going to go off, like not be super accurate eventually as the state of the world changes, as just like what you're predicting doesn't line up with the real world enough. So that's why you want to monitor it. And then just, having the way that ML models work is they need to make predictions on basically numerical data. So you need to coerce the data to translate into numbers, and you do that like in feature stores. Anyway, so this, you can see that we have like this core skill set, but from there you can go in these different directions is the point. All right. So some people end up becoming more interested in analytics. Some people end up becoming like very interested in like the cloud and infrastructure. Obviously, you can see I put Python and SQL kind of as the core of everything. So this is why we're spending so much time and why I emphasize this so much. Regardless of what direction you want to move into, people will probably be evaluating this skill set, and for good reason. So Terraform is something that we do have a little bit of curriculum on. We may be able to work that in as well. Terraform automates your cloud infrastructure, so you can write out code specifying what you want, and then instead of like point and clicking to create your AWS infrastructure, you can use Terraform for that. But we may be able to get to that. We'll see. Okay, so and then the other thing is, right, this is more engineering focused on this side, and this is a little bit more analytics focused on this side. One thing that I always have to tell students is like, please do not just like pay attention to the job title. Pay attention to the skill set, right? So like some people will be like, well, I don't want to do any data analysis, so I'm not going to apply to any data analyst jobs. But then if you look at the description of the data analyst job, it's really very engineering heavy, and then to say you don't want to do any data analysis is a little unrealistic, because collecting all this data is for a point, right? Is to make decisions with the data, and in order to do that, right, like that's data analysis. So, like people really having that skill set's important, and like one way or the other in your career, you're probably gonna want to learn it. All right. But so all these different roles are really just like, they are like, lots of times it lines up to this, but you're gonna see different combinations of these roles. So that's that. So the reason why I go into this now is because what you can start doing, one is like, if you start going on, talking to people that are data engineers, or we can talk about like different networking techniques in the future, meaning meet to people on like, there are like Slack channels and there are meetups and things like that. It's so that you kind of understand like the landscape and what people mean, and just like can pretty talk somewhat intelligently about it. And then the other thing is for you to kind of figure out also like which components of these you're most interested in. Okay, so for some of you it may be more of like the cloud stuff. For some of you, maybe it's like you like the data analysis, or you like integrating in some of the ML work, but that's something for you to start thinking about and exploring, right? So that gives us into like the next lesson, which is just like identifying your particular focus. So typically, like you might, if you've applied for other jobs, you may have heard this of like being T-shaped. Okay, what T-shaped means is that you're wide across, like your skill set is wide across multiple areas and deep in a specific area, right? So, we cover kind of like that you have this wide technical skill set, but then you may want to go deeper, right, into like the cloud, or into analytics, or into, like an ML component, right? Or maybe into front end for some people. So, it's like kind of having your particular specialty within the stack, and you want that to line up to your interests, but you also want it to, be practical. So the reason why being T-shaped is important is because when you read a job description, so I literally copied this just from like a random job description, you start to see this as like a T-shaped job description. So, or at least I do. So if I look at this, I see Power BI, right, for building dashboards. So this is data analytics right here. This is also data analytics right here, DBT Snowflake. So right now it sounds kind of like an analytics engineering role, but then all of a sudden we hear about like a data lake using Azure, right, which is Microsoft's cloud thing, Terraform, right, which is what David was talking about, and GitHub Actions. So this is a combination actually of data analytics and cloud. All right. So if you have this like specialty or like interest in like the cloud component and also the analytics, well then you match kind of this particular skill set, right? And it's very easy to like pitch yourself, or it's a lot easier to pitch yourself as someone who really matches this job, as opposed to just like, I'm a data engineer. I saw you posted about data engineering. Let's talk, right? Like what I typically try to do when I recommend students and what's successful for them is you want to match what's particular about their job to what's particular about your skill set, right? That way it's like, look at the odds, right? We're a match. So that I've been have seen be very effective, right? So, but it's your job to want to like pick up on the particular flavor of the job description, and then ideally, if you match it, right, it will make you very competitive. So you can be T-shaped both in the like have a particular focus in the tech stack, but then also in the subject matter, right? So for instance, people interested in healthcare, or like there's lots of jobs about like healthcare like policy or health insurance stuff that often like comes up. Crypto is less popular obviously than it used to be, but finance certainly, marketing, supply chains, we see jobs opportunities in all these types of fields. So, like as you either like through the internship or through just your personal projects, or just through like reading blogs, or reading books, or looking at companies and their GitHubs about like their code bases, how they have these particular applications of data engineering. That's a way to like show your interest and to develop a real understanding of a domain, right? A particular subject matter. And then obviously like using your previous employment background is perfect, if you want to stay in that direction. Oftentimes I do recommend it is typically a little easier just to stay in that, if you come from healthcare, to stay in healthcare and then pivot later on. But like you can, you can also try to develop like a domain expertise, over the next several months. All right. And then one thing you need to be able to explain is just like, and we'll obviously focus on this a lot, is like, why are you interested in this? Like you need to be able to answer that for yourself, and then also for others. The more that you can answer that, like people really want to hire for that. You're coming in not as a senior engineer, right? So they're banking on you developing your skills and on bringing like enthusiasm, whereas people that have been doing it for 30 years might not have that. So if you're coming in junior and you don't have like genuine enthusiasm in it, right? Like that's not a good combination. They're banking on the fact that you will grow, and also that like just having passion in general is a huge differentiator, because if you've ever hired someone, that it makes a difference, in terms of performance, like that just nothing else can. All right. So, thinking about it, like your interest can change over time over this course. But you want to be able to like think carefully about it and identify, what is it that you really like? Like if you find yourself liking AWS or liking Terraform, but not it's like, what is it about it that you really like? That way you can communicate that. So, I have like different ways to display your particular focus. So I said, you can obviously do do projects, your internship, and if you are currently working, this would be another, like if you are currently working, this is a little bit off topic, but I wanted to make sure I didn't forget this. If you currently have a job, try to do Python and SQL in your employment, or as many of these not as many of these skill sets, but any of these skill sets will be useful. But the more that you can do any Python or SQL professionally, the easier it will be, because you just want to take advantage of it, because then you can say on your resume, I've written Python and SQL, in this position, and all of a sudden that experience becomes more relevant. Obviously, this is a philosophy behind like our internships is, we're trying to have you have that professional skill set before you even start looking for a job. All right, so if you can, if you are currently working, I'm happy to brainstorm with you ways that you can, ask your manager, or even if your manager, even if like there's no time for you to do it during work hours, perhaps you can do it after work hours, or just allocate some time for it, even if it's not kind of asked of you. That way, again, you can just put it on your resume, and it's something that people will be impressed by, and and it certainly will come up in interviews. So we have lots of students do that. Okay. So anyway, this is a little early for this topic, but I think it can help to just understand these different components. Questions about any of this? No?
Is that going to be available for us, Jeff?
Yeah, so let me deploy it now. So it's under this, understanding your skills, the data landscape, and then identify a particular focus. All right, so this is like the first. We have lots of kind of career lessons, but this is like the first step, right? And something to start thinking about. And it's also, like while you're working on your projects and working through this material, it's just, it's a time for you to kind of figure out what you are, what you do, what you find yourself drawn to. All right, cool.